Hello and welcome to Real Mojo.LIVE, where we are about to interview Garry Meier. Garry Meier is a legend in Chicago and that area in radio and really across the U.S. He's a friend of mine from a men's group called Metal, and just an incredible individual. He's an Emmy Award winner, and he's also in the Radio Hall of Fame. Not to mention, he's one of the funniest dudes I've ever met. So without further ado, let's get Garry on here. Garry.
Jeremy, you said two words right before we went on. You were monkeying with some knobs or something. And
Yes.
You said two words that you don't want to hear in the cockpit, in the operating room,
Okay.
or from your accountant. Oh, Lord. and as you're getting ready to fire this thing up, you're looking at something, oh, Lord. And those are the words. And I don't know what the hell was going on there, but
Yeah.
you got it fixed, whatever it was.
Yeah. We had a slight delay on going live, but here we are. And I just wanted to first give you an opportunity to basically tell us a little bit about you know.
Well, I was born Caucasian on the south side of Chicago, and I grew up in a fairly large middle-class family. I'm the oldest of six.
Wow.
And my father was in the dry cleaning business, and then he sold life insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, I got the bug to be on the radio. And I think the bug was when the Beatles came to America, and I was listening to these guys on the radio in Chicago. They all had conduits to the Beatles. They would be with the Beatles when the Beatles came through Chicago, and they had all these cool connections. And I thought, they get paid for listening to music and just talking? That seems like a good job. And I was intrigued, but had no idea how to get into radio. And I was in high school at the time. And there was a guy on the radio who would read a letter from a listener every afternoon on his show. He also talked about reincarnation a lot. He said that he thought he was going to come back as a butterfly. One day I walk out of my house and there's a big monarch butterfly dead on the lawn, and my first thought was, this guy's name was Larry Lujak. I'm going to send this butterfly to Larry and tell him that I killed one of his relatives. So I taped the butterfly to a piece of paper, typed up this letter, Dear Larry, I know you're into reincarnation. You say you're going to come back as a butterfly. I think I killed one of your relatives. And a few days after I sent it, he read it on his show. And when I heard my material, I thought, well, now I've got to pursue this. There's my material. And over the next few years, I started to form a plan. In the meantime, I was in pharmacy school because I was working at a drugstore and didn't have any other solid way to go into any kind of profession. So I thought, well, I'll be a pharmacist because that looks like something. And I started going to pharmacy school, and that was not my ticket. I found out very early on that this was a fish out of water situation. And then I went into construction to make some money because I was tired of being a poor student, but I still had this radio dream. And then this movie, American Graffiti, came out in the early 70s, and Wolfman Jack was the centerpiece of this movie. He was a disc jockey, and throughout the whole movie, they're all listening to the radio. It was set in the early 60s, and everybody that was driving around, cruising around town, would listen to Wolfman Jack, and I just liked the whole feel. I mean, it started to add to what I was already thinking. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, how do I do this? And I looked in what were called the Yellow Pages back then, a paper book that had businesses in them, and looked for broadcasting schools. And there were a couple in Chicago. I just picked one at random and started going. And that's how it really kind of started.
That's cool. What was your first radio job?
Well, as it turns out, I start going to this broadcasting school, and there's a guy there teaching who was working on a Chicago radio station. And we became friends, and he brought me to the radio station. And as it turns out, there was a job that he recommended me for, and I got this job. A couple months into this career of going to school, I'm already working at a Chicago radio station.
Oh, wow.
It was an all automated radio station, meaning machines played radio. You would tape whatever news, traffic, weather, whatever, and plug it into a machine. But still, I just started, so I didn't care. And I think I was doing weekends at the outset, and then I moved into a full-time position, and I stayed there for a year. But I was already in the core of radio in Chicago, the third largest city in the country, and you can't ask for a better start than that. And I started from there, and I was on the air, I'll never forget this, on Halloween for the first time in 1973. They said, hey, we're going to put you on tonight. And I had no idea that this was coming. It was just at the spur of the moment, and I was as nervous as hell. But I was also...
Was this the first day?
I was probably there, Jeremy, a month or so. And I got the call to, hey, get ready. You're going to strap on the microphone and do something. And it was Halloween. I'll never forget it was Halloween. And
yeah.
I did the news. I don't even remember what I did because I was just so excited. I did, I think, the news and weather and traffic, and then went back to the oldies music. But that was the moment, and it all started from that moment on.
And you had like a lot of like stunts and stuff that you got involved with, and I think it'd be fun to kind of go down and talk about some of those things you did back in the 70s and 80s. And was it the 70s when you got started?
It was pretty much, yeah, late 70s when what you're referring to started, when I was partnered with somebody. And this started to go supernova because we did this event called Disco Demolition in the summer of 1979. And the way that got started, the guy that I worked with, Steve Dahl, had come from a radio station in Chicago that went from a rock format to a disco format. And he left that station and ended up at the station I was working at. I was working all nights, and they brought him in to do mornings. And at 6 in the morning when he was starting and I was leaving, I would, before he came on, I'd say something that he could maybe work off of, because I had heard his show when I was going home after my all-night show. I would listen to him on that other station on my way home, and I thought, this is interesting. I've never heard anything like this. So when he started at the station I was at, I'd throw something out there, and then he would riff on it for the first few minutes of his show. And about the second or third day in, he said, hey, don't go anywhere, let's talk. And we started going back and forth together after his show had started. And then the program director heard some chemistry and said, you two have to work together. And that's how that started. But what became of those first few months was this little thing we did, this bit we did, where he would start talking about the other station going disco, and he'd play a disco song, and then we were still playing 12-inch discs back then. He would take the record, the album, off the turntable and smash it, and you could hear it being broken on the air. And he would scratch the record, and we'd start making fun of whatever artist that was. And then that became something we did every day. And then it started to get into this fever pitch of listeners started calling in. We loved that bit. And then some bars called and said, hey, why don't you come out to the bar and do a little disco demolition at the bar? So we'd go out there, we have a band with us, and we'd take a bunch of records, we'd break the records and throw them up in the air, and da-da-da, and everybody went goofy, crazy, hey, that's funny. And every time we went to the next bar, it was a bigger venue. It would be 500 people the first time, 1,000, and then it started to build over the next few months. And then the son of the owner of the Chicago White Sox, he was the guy in charge of their marketing and he would do something every summer at White Sox Park called Teen Night, I believe. And he would listen to our show, and he said, "Why don't you guys do Disco Demolition at the ballpark one night in between a doubleheader?"
Smokes!
And the promotion was listeners would bring a disco album and pay 98 cents to get in. The frequency was 97.9, so you'd pay 98 cents, and that would get you in. Well, lo and behold, this is now July. We had started doing our bit in March. The buildup was really strong. There were 50,000 people, mostly our fans, in the park, and another 15, 20,000 that couldn't get in. When we got there, it was madness. And we thought, oh, okay, this seems to be working. So we go into the park, and it was the Sox and the Detroit Tigers, and they played the first game, and you could just see in the crowd, it was a hot summer night, and you could see the records being already flung. They brought extras. They turned one in to get in, and then they would bring an extra and use it as a Frisbee. So those were flying around, and it was getting pretty crazy. And we, at the end of the first game, we got on an Army Jeep and went on the field, and we did a little shtickle. Steve had a song called "Do You Think I'm Disco," based on the Rod Stewart song "Do You Think I'm Sexy."
Yeah.
And he sang that, and we did a little banter. And then they had all the records that people brought. They were in a bin in center field, and their pyrotechnics guy, he set off the charge, and all these records blew up. And there were flames and this and that. Okay. So then we took a little tour around the outer edge of the park on the warning track, on the Jeep, and the beer's flying, and it's great. Now it's really dialed up. We leave the field, we go back up into the press box, and by the time we got in the press box, people had started to run on the field. And now they're throwing records all over the place, and it's pandemonium. And we're looking at this going, uh-oh, this is really interesting now. And the owner of the club, Bill Veck, is down on the field trying to encourage people to get back in their seats. And they finally did. The police were called. And by the time they cleared the field, the Detroit Tigers manager, Sparky Anderson, said, "This is not playable." Some sod had been ripped up, and I didn't think it was that bad, but the Sox had to forfeit the second game. So that was that. Yeah. And that was one of our stunts, as you would call it.
Yeah.
And that's back in '79.
Dude, happened. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I was wanting to come, but I was 3, so
Okay. 3-year-olds, at least mentally, there were 3-year-olds in the audience,
oh yeah,
including ourselves. So you missed it.
Yeah.
But when did you hear about it? Did you ever hear about? When did you become aware of that event?
I heard you tell the story on a metal event, and that's when I realized. I looked it up and kind of found out a little more about it, but I was wanting to hear it firsthand from you.
Okay, well, that's what happened.
Yeah. So another thing, and by the way, I'm having trouble with my headphones, so that's why I'm having to take them off when I talk. But I'll get that fixed on the next show.
Are you going to say, "Oh, Lord"?
Oh, Lord.
Oh, Lord. Oh. Smoke in the cockpit. Look out.
Yeah.
On the runway.
Yeah. Well, another thing I was wanting to ask you about, now, Ken Ruthkowski, who is the leader of Metal, the group that we met in, obviously he's one of your biggest fans, and you two are friends, and he apparently you really inspired him to get into interviewing people in the career path that he has taken. So how did y'all find originally meet, and when did y'all's paths cross?
Ken was doing a little radio show at a little radio station in Joliet, Illinois. And he called me, and he was a fan of our show, and he called me and said, "Hey, would you be a guest on my show?" And I said, "Sure." I didn't know Ken at that point. And he said, "Okay." And I said, "All right, where's the radio station?" And he goes, you would come out here?" I thought you would just do it over the phone. And I said, no, I like when I'm talking to somebody, I like to see them and be in the room. There's a better atmosphere if it's done that way. He couldn't believe that I would drive out to this radio station and do his show.
Well, I can't believe you're doing mine. So,
but I don't know why people find that odd. I just think if people ask, I'm flattered that you asked, and I'm glad to do these things. I like talking to people like you, and Ken was one of these guys who I claim is a wizard, because I'll tell you why, Jeremy. After that interview, we were in contact and we start to visit more, and he'd start to tell me more of what he wanted to do. And he's one of those guys that goes from 0 to 1,000 in about a month. And technically, I can't keep up with him. It's just so much, which is fine, because you need a guy like that in the room to move you along.
Right.
One day he says, hey, come over to my apartment and I'll show you some of this technological stuff that you might not be aware of. I said, okay. So we go into his office, and he said, let's call somebody on the computer. Now, this is hard to believe now, this was before there was audio on computers.
Wow.
There was no audio at one point. I don't know if you're probably 6 when that was the case. But I said, Ken, how do you do that? He plugged the microphone into the computer and he hit something on the keyboard. And within about a minute, we're talking to somebody in Australia.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this guy is unbelievable.
Yeah.
How do you do that? So that's the kind of stuff that he would bring to the table. And then a few years after that, he came to my apartment and he said, you're on the radio. I just don't see radio's future. I just see it not continuing the way it is. And it was still kind of at its zenith when I was doing it at that point. He said, let me show you something. Opens the computer, plugs the microphone in, and hands it to me. And my daughter was about 7, 8 years old at that point. He said, interview your daughter right now. So I did about 10 minutes with my daughter, and he played it back for me. He said, you're on the radio, but it's on the computer, which was the embryonic stage of podcasting.
Right.
And Ken was already a year or two ahead of that. And that's what I mean. He's always ahead of the curve. But I was too comfortable in radio to just completely go, I'm done with radio. I'm going to move into the podcasting world. Right. So it was a few years later, but he was right. That's the way it's all migrating. And radio is a shadow of itself from what I experienced. I was fortunate enough to be there when it was at its zenith.
Yeah. And that's something that I really wanted to kind of mention too, because one of the things that I, was lucky enough, I believe, to be born in the 70s, so that I got to experience more of an analog world, a world where I got to go out and play and not be tied to a computer or, some sort of device. And, now it's to the point where technology has advanced so much that there's this instant thing going on. Like, people are watching us right now, and if you have a booger in your nose, you don't, but if you did, everybody would see it. It would be real time, and then they could talk about it within seconds. And I think there's kind of a thing where that, honestly is not healthy. It doesn't give you time to process or understand or really enjoy the moments. Things like, for instance, having a record, right? Being able to put a record on, even a CD, just having something that's tactile, and we're so far away from that now. So I'd love to hear kind of your take on that, and what you see that's good now, and really what you miss about those days when you were in the zenith of radio.
Well, to your point about it's instant and there's no mystery, the beauty of when I got into radio, it was just AM and FM, and it was in your car. And that's the beauty of radio. It's in the car. It's an on-off button, a couple buttons. That's it. And you had, in a market like Chicago, say 35, 40 stations. So the competition isn't that expansive, whereas there are 7 million, 8 million podcasts. And that's the pool everybody's in that does podcasts. But the beauty of radio back in that day was you didn't see the person. You had to use your imagination. What did they look? And I did this too. I bet he looks like this. I'll bet he's blonde, 6'5". That's what they said about me before people met me. They had listened and they go, when they met me, I thought you were blonde and probably 6'6" or something.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty. That was the imagination that got to be in play
Right.
when you listen to the radio. And people would call in, and that was the dynamic. Now you have all these pipelines, and you can see this for 8 seconds, and then jump. And there's so much that people are overloading. There's too much. And I know technology marches on, but I long for those days where it's a little more civil, and now people can make any kind of comment on the internet and hide, and they don't have to identify themselves with the radio. There was a system of you can't just say anything on the show, and a caller can't just say anything. There
Right.
are legalities that the FCC would enforce, and there are, I think, good reasons to have guardrails, because you can see when it's gone to the Wild West, what happens. It's just chaos. It's just everybody's attacking everybody. And I don't know. I don't want to sound like the guy on the block that goes, "Get off my lawn." but there's, you can see this. We are really losing our crap in so many ways, and it's just madness.
Right. Well, you know, the political stuff and all the things that are going on, both racial and all of those things, honestly, you know, I feel like in some ways we've gone the wrong direction completely. Like, we've become more divisive.
Yeah.
And it's because there's this instant gratification. Everybody makes an instant judgment when it's really something you need to think about, and think about who you're getting involved with. Sanity. We see stuff like that all the time, and it's like, I feel like I'm in a flipso world sometimes with the way that people have just gone the way of the wind when it comes to using logic and sense and trying to work things out together.
Well, let me just insert this. At this point, I don't do any politics on my podcast, and I didn't do politics on my radio shows. And it's not because of Trump or this or that or red or blue. I never did it because, Jeremy, I looked at the sea of politics and thought, there's no entertainment value here.
No.
It's irritating and divisive, and this is before the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's always been a bit divisive, and now it's completely unhinged. But I was thinking today, and I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, there was a time you'd be at home and the doorbell would ring, and it would be family, friends, whatever, just popping over to visit. And people would visit for 3-4 hours on a Sunday. Coffee cake would come out, and coffee and cigarettes and all. And you hear these discussions about politics, religion. Nobody was yelling at each other.
Nope.
It was civilized, and we were more together because we were together.
Right.
And this whole urge to gather doesn't happen unless people want to get together to hate something, it seems.
Right.
Or get out of hand. And that whole we're here together and having a good time, somehow that got lost. Nobody goes to somebody's house unannounced and rings the bell anymore. Does that happen anywhere?
No.
Yeah. And that's part of what I think made us kind of genteel in the way we went about everything.
Well, one of the things I would say is I stay away from politics too, because I'll tell you the truth. I don't believe like a certain party, and I feel like now it's like, hey, pick your team and you better stick to it. And like, if you don't, everybody's going to hate you and cancel you. And I'm like, man, I don't want anything to do with it. I don't care about politics. What I long for is stuff like back in the day when people like, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill would get together for drinks and actually work, stuff out. That's not what we have going on now. And to me, it's no fun. There's no real value, like you said, in entertainment in it. I don't want to bring dark shit to the world.
They're just protecting their brand. I don't. If something gets done and it benefits the rest of the country, that's a nice little thing. We didn't plan on that.
Right.
That's a nice little benefit, but it's just by accident because we're ready to get in there and just protect our brand. I want to just protect me. And I wrote a blog on my website, GarryMeier.com. It's in this Out of My Mind section. That's what I call it.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a boogeyman now in the last, I'd say, 40 years. And I'm going to say this started when CNN first came on, 24/7 News. That was the first operation to go 24/7 News. And now we've got all of these platforms that are doing 24/7 News. Now it's over the years where they figured this is how we have to do this so the eyeballs go to us. We're going to say there's a boogeyman out there, and we're going to show you how to avoid the boogeyman or protect you from the boogeyman or whatever it is. That's what they do. And by boogeyman, it could be anything. It's the weather. I mean, the way they do these weather reports now, it's really bizarre. And this is all a consultant that has gotten a hold of these TV stations and told them to do this.
Right.
They don't do it where they say, okay, this storm system is going to affect 8, 9, 10 states. No, don't say that's a small number. Say it's going to affect 50 million people. That's a more hysterical thing to say. And that's what they do. It's always the weather is a boogeyman, the economy, there's a virus, there's always a boogeyman, and that's the way they go about their business because it's commerce. One of the most egregious things they do, and I've been talking about this on my show for a long time, is when there's a mass shooting and they give the name and the picture of the shooter over and over again, and research has shown that when they do that, that ignites the next nutball because the next nutball likes what that looks like.
Right.
And they want to be part of that. These news operations, they are part of the problem at that point, and I don't know why they don't know that. Look at all the mass shootings. Is it just because there are more unhinged people? Whatever that issue is, but giving this idiot, this moron, this psycho, that kind of notoriety is something that other psychos like.
Yeah.
And they want it. And what is the benefit of showing the picture and giving the name over and over again? You know the shooter, you don't know the victims. That's wrong. It's all upside down.
Right. Yeah, and like, you know, the way that they handle that, you know, it seems like it's just it keeps happening because we can't seem to figure out a way to protect our children, you know. And the bottom line is we got to quit glorifying the people that commit these crimes, like you said, and we really have to figure out a way to protect our children. And it doesn't have to be pretty, right? It might have to mean that we have, you know, metal detectors for people going into schools. It might have to mean an actual guard. I don't know, but what I think is, like you said, that's a negative thing that's kind of pushing people with that negative attitude and that you know, want to commit those kind of crimes to do it.
Well, why has it accelerated to the point it has accelerated to in the last 25, 30 years? There has to be some component that's new, that all the other things were there too 40, 50 years ago, but something's happened in the last 30, 40 years to accelerate it. Is it that? Is it giving these people the notoriety that gets the other ones that are on the verge and get that little, oh, yeah, I like the way that looks. And off they go, and they go ad nauseum until the next one. That one goes into the ether. They're lighting one off the other, too. They're not doing any, reporting them does nothing. I don't even know why they report them anymore. It's just commerce. It's like showing the destruction of the earthquake, or now there's been another one, I guess, in the last couple of days in Turkey and Syria. And here's the other thing, and I hate to sound cynical, but February is a ratings month for television, so that's why you see all this crazy-ass stuff, even crazier than the normal stuff you see, where they're sending their key anchor over to Turkey and standing in the rubble. Why? Why is this person there? And then they run commercials. They're just using this to get to the next commercial. So my solution, Jeremy, was, okay, you want to use these people and their misery for your benefit, for your profit? How about you say at the end of the broadcast, we're going to donate all of the profits we've made from showing this horror to help you rebuild. How about that? And that's not going to happen. It's commerce. It's whatever tragedy is, it's their wheelhouse. They love it. Hurricanes are the best because they have a buildup. It's a week or two where they can track it, and they love the hurricane. And then they send these idiot reporters out to show what 150 mile an hour wind looks like if you're standing in it. I mean, it's just bizarre. Right?
Yeah, and they my favorite one is the guy that stands outside and he's playing the air guitar and or has the flag out there in his shorts in the hurricane winds, you know, and they're playing Metallica or Pantera. That's right. If you're going to get out there, do it right.
Every hurricane is the same. Just show the stock footage from 10, 20 years ago. It's the oscillating stop sign, the dangling stoplight, and then the tin roof blowing down the street. It's the same footage. Just show that. and tell that idiot reporter to go and be inside somewhere. I mean, really, it's just ludicrous.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you about too is, obviously, you were during those times, you got to, go through a lot of different equipment and things that you used on the radio, right? To broadcast and so on. What was your favorite setup? What was the coolest kind of vibey thing that you had going with the setup for your radio station and all that? What was the place that you were in your Zen moment?
I think, Jeremy, when you ask somebody who pursued something, say 60 years ago, and has gone through all these changes, and when you ask them, and I'm going to use this as a stepping off point, if you asked Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney, right now, what would be the favorite thing for you to do? It would probably be, I want to go play a 200-seat club. Because that's how they started. That's where it all came together in their head, or started to. And that's where their energy was, because we're trying to make it, and this is how we started. To your point about radio equipment, it was the studio that had a turntable on each side of me, 12-inch discs, and we had these 4-track cartridges that had all the commercials on them and some songs, and you would just go from one cartridge to the next. And here's a sidebar to that. Every radio station had these 4-track cartridges, and thousands of them, because you needed them. It was the lifeblood of the radio station. About 15 years ago, I'm working at this radio station. The first day, I have to use the bathroom. It's down the hall, and you need a key to get into the bathroom. And then they said, before you go, make sure you have something in the door to the studio, otherwise you'll be locked out.
Oh.
So I walked to the door, and what they were using for the doorstop was one of those 4-track cartridges. This was an amazing piece of equipment in its day, and it's now a doorstop. But so much has happened in that same vein, the payphone, the electric typewriter, where these things, when they were happening, you thought, oh, there can never be anything better than this. Now they're doorstops.
Well,
and that's so because it went all digital, and there was no disc, there was no CD, nothing. It's all fairy dust. It's in the computer now.
Right. Well, I think one of the funniest things to me, and one of the worst pieces of technology, I think, was the 8-track and the tape player, right? Because it really was great from the perspective if you're selling music, because at some point, if somebody really likes your music, they're going to wear it out, and that tape's going to break, or something's going to happen. And the 8-track, same thing, it's going to break, or you're going to have to buy another one. Brilliant, but horrible from a user perspective, because, man, how many times did you have a pencil in one of those things trying to twist it back to get it to where it was supposed to be, Well,
you're talking about the cassette. The 8-track, there was no pencil. It was toast. If that, you're thinking of the cassette that I would use the pencil and the sprocket and da-da-da. But think about this. If you were a recording artist back in the 60s, a successful one, so you put initially out the album and the 45s, and then it had the technology advanced to the 8-track. So that same music that you've already recorded is now on 8-track, and you sold it all over again, right? And then the cassette, and then you sold it again, same music, recorded 10, 20, 30 years ago now. So you made money again for no extra work. And then it went to CD, and now it's all online, and you're selling it again and again and again. So for those artists, this has been a bonanza, especially those artists that got ripped off in the 60s because they didn't know the business. Now, maybe they were able to corral the sales of these latter things over the years, but they all got ripped off in the 60s because they didn't know the business was going to be what it was.
Yeah, and I was going to also mention, there was one of the shows that I caught that you did, where you had a person calling in asking about whether which toilet seat you preferred and that sort of thing. Do you remember that bit?
Really?
Where they I'll get it to you if you don't, but you had a co-host on there and y'all were going back and forth and riffing. It was great.
Which kind of toilet seat? What kind are there? I didn't know there were multiple kinds.
Oh, they're basically two kinds. There's two different shapes, but yeah, y'all were going off about toilets and toilet seats, and it was great.
I don't remember
dude.
that at all. I think you're thinking of somebody else, Jeremy.
No, it was you. It was definitely you. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
I'll prove it to you.
Okay, I've never thought about
What?
I thought there was a standard one,
Yeah.
and that works fine. They haven't improved that. I mean, you could put some padding on it or put that cover over the lid, but beyond that,
Yeah.
what are you doing with it?
Right. Well, speaking of that, and like I said, I'll get that to you. But I found that. What was your favorite, probably like kind of riff that you did? Like, was there any sort of like thing that you did over and over that really worked for you and that you had a lot of fun with?
We didn't beat too many things into the ground, hopefully. I remember certain guests that were outstanding, and if you remember the late great comedian Sam Kinison,
Oh
how
yeah.
old were you when he was around? Were you 6,
Oh, yeah.
7, 8, 9? What were you? I'm trying to place you now in the
Well,
in the scheme of all this.
I was born in '76. I'm 46 now. Sam Kinison would have been in the '80s.
Well-
I would have been a teenage kid.
He's been dead for 30 years, so
Yeah.
you were in your teens. Anyway,
Yeah.
Sam would come on the show and do 90 minutes of just off the top of his head stuff that he wouldn't do on stage. It was just new stuff he came up with as we're riffing with him. Those kinds of guests, Albert Brooks, the great Albert Brooks, would call in the show and do 90 minutes and just hysterical stuff. And yeah, that kind of thing where these are guys that I idolized and they liked the show and they participated to that extent. That was special to me.
Yeah, I think. I mean, yeah, those little morsels, those little things in history had to be really special. I mean, Sam. You know, I absolutely love Sam, and I still to this day, every once in a while, will throw in a you know.
Yeah. Oh my God, that guy! He went into territory that I've not heard anybody do since. And here's a moment that I remember. We're on the air. We get a call from a guy, and he said, "I'm working in the John Hancock building in Chicago, and the paramedics have just wheeled Chris Farley out of his apartment." And this was, and we thought, how do we confirm this? As it was true. Chris Farley had just died of an overdose, and this guy was working on an apartment down the hall and heard all the commotion and came out, and there was Chris Farley on the stretcher dead going out. And he called in right as that moment was happening. That kind of thing you remember.
Chris Farley was one of my favorites, and I actually have a buddy that looks just like him that we call Earthworm Jim. And he actually would come out when we would do concerts in college, and he came out one time and did like our MC and stuff. It was hilarious, but nothing better than down in the van the van down by the river. You know that
Right.
dude, that skit, and dude, Tommy Boy, Black Sheep, like all the great movies he did during that era. That was a great time of comedy too, man. Back in the 80s and 90s, you didn't have to sugarcoat everything. You could just say what you meant, and then you didn't get canceled every time, you know. And
Right. It wasn't
you know,
politically correct, as they say.
right.
Yeah.
And it's you know, nowadays, like if you say something wrong, somebody's on you like white on rice, and it's like it's on, you know.
Hey, you can't say white on rice.
Oh,
It doesn't matter what color rice is. Damn it, Jeremy. You know what? I'm going to have a drinking game here. When Jeremy takes his headphones off, take a drink. You cannot get situated with those, can you?
no. See, here's the thing. When I take them off, I don't hear the delay, and when I have them on, I can hear you. So I can. Yeah, usually it's not supposed to work that way, but at least I know people can hear us live. So yeah, we're good. But yeah, I have to take the headphones off, and I'm sorry about that.
Wait,
I will give
video
myself
going out?
lashings later.
Is the video going out with this or just audio?
Oh no, it's video and audio.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so that's why I wanted to mention, if people are looking at you going, what's wrong with the guy's headphones? He seems like he can't manage them.
No, it's not usually a problem, but I also,
gonna
it's
take a drink
hilarious
there.
because I'm sitting here trying to talk to you, and then while I'm talking, like it starts slowing down, and then I'm like, wow,
Wow.
So
All right.
it's difficult.
It's a good thing you don't wear a toupee because that thing would have been jostled
Oh, totally. I would have
that I
had to
know of.
strap it down with some
Yeah.
Gorilla glue.
There you go. There you
But yeah, so man, I think you definitely had a long career. You have an Emmy. You are in the Radio Hall of Fame. What is knowing you? That's probably not the thing necessarily that you're the proudest of or your proudest moment necessarily. But what are your proudest moments in your career so far and what you've done?
Well, as far as that goes, an Emmy, Radio Hall of Fame, I am flattered
Yeah.
because that was not something I thought about. I just thought I got into the business because it looked like a good way to make a living, and I thought I had something to offer. And those things coming along were just, oh my God, that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm appreciative. And if I've influenced other people to do a style like I was doing, and it became successful for them.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that from people. Hey, I listened to you and I started doing it in that same way, and I found that to be very good for me, or whatever. Or we made people laugh when things were not. And I get this still to this day. Hey, I was going through a real rough time. You said something that made me laugh, and it pulled me out of that funk. That to me, that's the payoff pitch as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Yeah, being able to help and impact people is important in life, and I here's the thing, I recently here in Austin we had a DJ named Del Dudley that was just phenomenal, and the funny thing, he had grown up part of his life in Odessa where I'm from. We have very similar accents, and people stop me all the time and say, "You sound like Del Dudley," so because we have similar accents, deep voice. He's a big guy. He recently got canned, from what I understand, and he's another guy that I believe is in the Radio Hall of Fame, and he's incredible. But it's like, man, what really aggravates me is back in the day when you had a radio guy, you had him for 15, 20 years. You didn't have him for 2 years, 3 years, and I just feel like a lot of these guys that are important to doing it well, doing it right, doing it with a sense of craft are being eliminated, and it's sad because he was awesome.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I had that very conversation today with a former colleague of mine, and we were talking about this on how something's working on these radio stations, and the next day they're gone. These people are gone, and the reasons are always crap. They don't make any sense. Radio is a visit, and when people connect with that person on the air and it's working, you don't want to tamper with it, because it's really hard to get. And what these radio stations have done over the last 15, 20 years is bizarre. They've got things that were working and decided, let's see if we can ruin this, and that's across the country. And you can't find replacements. Everybody's replaceable. I hear that, okay. Yes,
Right.
But to what extent? When you have somebody that's working, as you mentioned, this guy, 15 years, and it's going, don't try to fix that, because it's already working and good. And I've got stories. Everybody that's been in this business in the last 30 years has got stories of that nature where nobody can figure out what the hell the decision-making process is. It doesn't make any sense. You've got to have that, again, it's that visit. That's all it is. It's somebody talking to somebody in their car, whatever, wherever they are, and that is working. And it's a very hard thing to define on how it works or why it works, but when it does, embrace it and protect it.
Well, while I wouldn't recommend watching this show on video, you can lay it in your seat upside down and listen to my show like a radio show. But my point is I feel like that's still a very big thing we need is great hosts that are entertaining, people that Del Dudley, he was on the Dudley and Bob show, And, you know, the thing about the way that he entertained, they didn't have to play a ton of music because he was funny as hell. And like,
Yeah.
that's a talent to keep people driving down the road, captivated to what you're saying. And it's not one dimensional. If you're good at it, it's not one dimensional. And he was phenomenal. I did see that it looks like he has a podcast coming out. So who knows? Maybe I can get him on my show too. But incredible talent, and I just hated to see that go away here in Austin. But cities
it's
change.
In every town. It's in every town, Jeremy. That story is repeated in every town, and I'm sure anybody who's listening to this, wherever they're listening from, has somebody they listen to, and one day they were just gone, and why? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying the ratings cratered and that was the reason, and that was valid. Da, da, da. These are not good reasons for why these people are let go. Yeah.
And they don't look at him like talent. They look at him as a commodity, is what it seems like to me.
Radio is not... Here, this is the way we defined it years ago. Without somebody on the air that can gather a big audience, all radio is an office building with equipment. The person on the air is the lifeblood. That's what makes it fizz. That's the percussion. Nothing, but the managers think, well, it's just like anything else. No, it's not like making McDonald's hamburgers. It's not that. And if you lose the perspective of what it is, now you're heading down the wrong road. I can tell you that.
Right. Well, and I honestly, I still find a lot of entertainment in a good radio show, a podcast. And absolutely, I don't need a CD player in my car. I don't even need to connect it to the Bluetooth. Man, if there's a good radio station, I'd rather listen to somebody talk and make sense and entertain me. And it certainly is one of those things that's grown into many other things. But in another sense too, like the podcast stuff. The cool thing about that, a lot less censorship, a lot less things to have to deal with, and you hear from people that maybe they wouldn't have had a show otherwise.
Well, that's good and bad.
Public access.
With radio, there was a level that you had to achieve to get to a large city or a large radio station. So there were filters, right. And that's good in every profession because it keeps the pipeline fairly loose and able to promote the people that should be promoted. And now everybody's a star. Anybody could be a star on the internet, have a TikTok channel or whatever, and that's it. There's no level of, well, I got to exceed in this and then I can move up a notch. No, it's get in and you're in.
Well, the other side of that too, though, is you really don't have this corporate America thing being able to control it. So that's kind of cool in that regard.
Well, that's the good part. Right. Yeah. Right. Everything's a trade-off, right?
Yeah. Well, Garry, it has been absolutely incredible to have you on the show today. Man, I've enjoyed it, and I would like you to stay on for a little bit after I do the outro. But man, in closing, how can people follow you? How can people see what you're doing? Keep up with Garry Meier today and what you have going on.
Just go to my website, GarryMeier.com. GarryMeier. It's probably on the screen somewhere, but it's spelled with 2 R's. Garry is spelled with 2 R's. Yeah. GarryMeier.com. That's my website. That'll guide you into all of whatever I do.
Well, Garry, man, honestly, this has been one of the most exciting Real Mojos that I've got to do. I appreciate you.
I'm honored that you asked me, and we're going to get those headphones fixed because your arms are going to be exhausted by the end of this.
Well, you know what? Every week I get to spend 30 or an hour with this guy Garry on Metal. We have a group where we get together and watch videos and crack jokes, and not for the public, and it's a lot of fun. And just being able to do that every week with you, and then get you on my show and enjoy this conversation. I think my guest or my audience is really going to love this interview. So thank you so much.
Well,
and
Jeremy, I just want to have a good time in life. Nothing's making sense, and we've got this Webb telescope that's going to the outer edge of the universe. to tell us what. I don't know. We couldn't comprehend it even when it does send this stuff back. What are we doing? All we care about here is the Shamrock Shake is back on McDonald's menu. And we've got this telescope. Oh, look at this is how the universe started. Don't care. Can't do anything with it. Just leave us alone. Don't remind us that we're in this black hole all by ourselves, because we are. And there's the note to end on.
All right. Well, thank you, and I'll get these headphones fixed just for you, and we will talk to you later. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Collective Cart is a more equitable way to do e-commerce. Whether you need a partner for growth or e-commerce services, we got you covered. We're a collective of artists, devs, designers, and growth experts that work to build your e-commerce vision. We have two ways of doing that. One, we can become your partner, giving you a heavily discounted rate for services as we partner for equity in what you're doing to see exponential growth. Two, we have different levels of transparent pricing that can be custom fit for you. Schedule a call at the bottom of our website, collectivecart.io, for either choice. Either way, you can win with Collective Cart, a more equitable way to do e-commerce. collectivecart.io.